Hello everyone, and welcome to the unboxing of Umbraco 15. This release brings significant improvements for larger websites, as well as new features for content editors. To discuss all this, I'm joined by three of my wonderful colleagues. Bjarke, the head of CMS. Hello, Bjarke.
Hello, Lotte.
Jacob, the CMS team lead. Hello, Jacob.
Hello.
And Ken, senior developer on the CMS. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
Hi. So first, let's take a look at where we are, I think, in the release schedule of Umbraco. We are midway between two LTSs. We are now version 15. We are very closely aligned with Microsoft's release cadence, and we are releasing on .NET 9, which they will have released 2 days before us, I think. So the benefit to us is we've been able to use some new features that came with .NET 9. The benefit for you Umbraco implementers is that you can now use any .NET 9 features, C# 13 features in your own applications. The first thing I think we should talk about is the lazy loaded content cache with .NET 9 hybrid cache. Over to you, Bjarke, please.
Yes. So before we can talk about it, we should talk about how the published content was served in the past. So between Umbraco 8 and up until 14, we had a feature called NuGet, which was the published content cache. It had a full clone of all content in memory on each server. If you roll forward to the next slide, you'll see the new setup in Umbraco 15. So now each server has multiple caches. It has navigational caches with all the navigation content parents, children, for both media and documents. It has routing caches. So all routes are determined on publish time, and it has a full cache of what is published and what is not. And then the new feature HybridCache is for all the properties on the content. So this is called the content caches. We have one for media, one for documents. And here you have an optional distributed cache. If you follow Microsoft standards, it's the iDistributed cache interface. And the Microsoft HybridCache gives us all the complexity that ensure that only a single user and a single thread are populating all the caches all the way if it's missing in the cache. So thereby we can still do all the regular features or regular stuff that you need, like traversing the tree for all the content, but we don't necessarily know what is on this content if you deep dive into some of the nested blocks and so on. On this diagram, the dashed lines show what is updated on events. So the navigation caches, routing caches, and published status caches are updated on each server. Every time something happens, the information is pushed out, so the content is up to date. Obviously, the removal of stuff is also pushed out, but if something is missing in the cache, it is on request time. It is fetched from the second level cache if it's there, or even the third level cache, which is the database. So I'll try to share my screen. So first thing is on the iPublished content, we had the parent property and we had the children property. These are now obsoleted because these are volatile. They don't change if there's changes on the document necessarily. You can have multiple children without this document that actually knows about it. So these are where you need to use these new caches instead. Besides that, we have some new configurations. We have a completely new element called Umbraco CMS Cache, where you can configure how many documents and media that are seeded during boot. By default, we ship with 2 seeders, one that does a breadth first search in the tree, and by default takes the first 100 items. So if you have 5 root nodes, it takes all of these, then continue on the children of the first node, and so on, until you reach this number. But you can increase it if you would like to have more preheated, or whatever you would call it. So the benefit here is you can actually decide yourself whether you want to have fast boot times or save memory. And we also have one where you can just specify the content type keys. It often makes sense that you have some doc types you always want to have in the cache. I have seen many implementations that have a settings node, which would make sense to always have available. And then you have some configuration for the actual cache entries. You can specify the duration cache for the local in-memory cache and the remote cache, and also for those that are seeded up front. So the default values are a full day when something is requested in the local cache, and a full year in the second level cache, and if it's seeded up front. But you can configure it. But you can also implement your own seeders. So you need to add an implementation of the iSeed key provider. I created a simple one here, my seed key provider. It basically just asks you to return a set of GUIDs. A really good use case here could be if you had some analytics data, you know what are your 100 most visited pages or whatever, you could see this. But only the imagination sets the limits here. And the way to specify to use an optional distributed cache is basically just follow Microsoft documentation to set up a distributed cache. So on this code, I set up a distributed SQL Server as the cache. This is obviously not the most performant. They also have Redis implementations, but just a simple way to show it. You specify a connection string, and obviously you have a super secret password. You have a schema, you have the table name, and thereby it will use this. And the cool thing about the distributed cache is it's out of process, so you can reboot, and it's still warm. And here's just an example where I did it. As you can see, I have some keys that have the binary data and all the timings for when something needs to leave the cache again. All of this is handled by the Microsoft implementation. Let's see, what should we talk about? We have maybe we don't have.
So that's pretty cool then, that like to just add that SQL Server cache is just those 6 lines of code. Thank you, Microsoft, for that, I guess. Just to go back to the seeding, just to make sure I've understood right. So the whole of the structure is in the cache. It's just we're not caching all the full properties of all the documents, which is what we used to do, right? We used to have everything in memory, which is why some Umbraco sites were, shall we say, memory hungry. And now the whole of the structure, the navigation part that you need, is in the cache, but the seeding, we're saying these are the documents that you want to have all the properties always there in the cache. And really people can go and configure it, fine tune it as they need, so that big sites can do it one way and small sites probably won't go anywhere near adding these sites.
By the end of the day, the right number is hard to determine. It's case by case, but in our testing, it seems to only be the latency to your second level cache or to the database that are actually put on top. So if you have a local, pretty near local database, if you are hosting on Azure or something, then it's not a big overhead if it's not in the cache. We're talking a few milliseconds.
Great. Well, that's going to make developers happy, some DevOps people happy. I think it's time to make content editors happy. If Bjarke, we can hand over the screen share to Ken, who is going to talk about streamlining multilingual content management with block level variations.
What a smooth transition.
Why, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so block level variance is a new feature in 15 as well. And block level variance sets out to solve a challenge that we see amongst editors. So when you use block properties or block property editors to, for example, build pages, sometimes you really want the same structure across your language variants. So you always have a stringent structure. It always looks the same across all languages when you render it in the front end. However, today and in the former versions of Umbraco, a block editor is no different than any other property editor. That the data in the block editor belongs to the variant on which it lives. So in this case, we have a language variant block editor. And though these structures look the same, they're actually entirely decoupled. So there is no connection between these structures. And that's all fine. This is how it works. It's supposed to work like this. That's how Umbraco works. But if you really want that same structure across all your language variants, and you manage a lot of languages, or you have big pages with a lot of blocks and you reorder them, eventually it might become a real hassle for you to keep these things synchronized. So this is where block level variance comes into play and what we aim to solve. So block level variance does things a little bit differently. Here we have a structure that is shared across all the variants, but we still allow for variant-specific content within each block. So in this case, we have the same structure, and it's a shared structure. As you can see, it has a little fine shared mark here. That means technically it's a language invariant property. But these blocks still contain language-specific or variant-specific data. So when we render this front end, you see the English rendering has an English title. And when we render the Danish variant, it has the Danish title instead. But they do share the same images, and that is because the images within each block, they're actually invariant properties. So we can try this out by saying, let's add a third block here. Whatever. An English title here, and we'll pick an image, and we could find some of these fine mushrooms, create this. And as you can see, this block has been added in both language variants, but over in the Danish one, it's sort of dimmed down and the title is missing because it is there, but it's not. So let's save and publish, and I'll publish both variants just to stress the point that I am not necessarily cheating here. Reload the front end for the English language variant. We'll see the English number 3 block. On the Danish language variant, it's not rendered out yet because it is, while it's there, it's not been created in Danish. So as soon as we go to edit it, and we'll have the Danish title here, you can see it's sharing the picture with the original block from the English language version because it's actually the same block property, but it has a language variant title. So we can create it. Now it's there and created. Save and publish the Danish language variant, and we have the Danish block, or we have number 3 block in Danish. And well, this might make even more sense when we start talking about how the structure, I mean, hopefully you can see the structure is shared, but if I start dragging this around, you'll see with your own 2 eyes that the structure is indeed shared. It updates on both language variants. And even more so, if I now only publish the English language variant. Of course, the order of the blocks change in English, but it also changes immediately in Danish because the structure is shared. So that's how invariant data is propagated in block level variants. And this applies to all invariant data. If I change the image on one block in one language and I publish it, it will immediately propagate to all the other variants and be published in all the published variants as well. So you can synchronize your content easily, if you will, in this way. And we're not limited to do this only at root level. So we can also do it in nested block lists or block grids as well. So we can keep doing this in as deep a structure as we will. Eventually, our editors will really dislike us, but we can in theory. Now, all jokes aside, block level variance works also in a nested context. So that is block level variance.
And we've not really been able to do this since Umbraco version 7 using a package called Vorto, as far as I'm aware. At least I did this back in version 7, and for a long time it's like, can we upgrade? No, not unless you want to have to rebuild. If they were using a grid, you'd have to completely replicate the grid for each variant, rather than, which is a very common use case, is images are the same, but the words need to be different for each language. So I'm thinking, Ken, when I say you've made a lot of people happier, you and the team
Yes. we have hopefully made.
Yes,
now you are saying upgrade, and I might just inject here that what happens here behind the scenes is we are replacing the block data format with a new format. And this means we need to migrate all your block content. So if you have large block heavy sites, there will be a long running migration when you move to 15.
You don't have to do anything. It's just be aware that there's some complicated migration logic happening behind the scenes.
Precisely. It'll take a while.
Yep.
So keep an eye out on the logs. It'll keep on logging, so you'll know it's still alive, but it will take a while to migrate if you have large sites. The upside here, other than the editor wins, is that the rendering part of this has not changed. There are no changes to how we're rendering things or how we're consuming things, because the output models remain exactly the same.
Nice. On behalf of all the people who implement these things, thank you very much for not changing, for not having to change that. Speaking of things that might have to change, God, segues abound in this program. Jacob, you're here for a reason. You're here to talk to us about a new rich text editor.
Yes, that is one of the reasons I'm here. Yep. So, yeah, back in September, let me just share this article here. Back in September, we announced that we were going to remove TinyMC in Umbraco 16. And I know we're only talking about Umbraco 15, but of course, we can't just remove a property editor from Umbraco without introducing a new property editor. So just to give you the rundown of it, TinyMC 6 is the current version we're using that has reached its end of support as of October 31st this year. And we have deemed TinyMC 7 incompatible with our license. We cannot use it as it is. So we're going to have to come up with an alternative. And we have been doing a lot of work up until version 15 to do just that, to qualify a lot of different rich text editors. And we have landed on Tiptap as the new rich text editor in Umbraco. But of course, in Umbraco 14, what we also did was split up property editors in schemas and UIs, which allows for just this scenario. So what we're doing in Umbraco 15 is introducing a new property editor UI built on top of the same schema that TinyMC used, which coincidentally has been renamed to Umbraco.richText already in Umbraco 14. It used to be called Umbraco.tinymc before that. So we can now build a new UI on top of the existing schema type, allowing you to reuse your content, to migrate your content to a new rich text editor. Just to give you an idea of Tiptap, we have been quite transparent on the development of it so far, and we are not done with it quite yet. What we wanted to achieve for 15.0 has been outlined here in the plan. Of course, to support standard HTML and all the Umbraco plugins such as media, embed, link, and blocks in DRT. We have also introduced a new toolbar designer. I can show you just in a minute. And the editor has been sort of redesigned from the ground up with extensions in mind, just as all other areas of the back office, of the new back office, is planned out. So anything that we have built on the editor can be seen as extensions, and you can remove those and add your own as well. So your own buttons, your own functionality, everything should be in there. But let's jump into Umbraco for a minute. Oh, hi, Sophie. This is a default Umbraco 15. And if I go to the data types, I will find the built-in rich text editor data type here. And in Umbraco 15, it now defaults to Tiptap as the property editor UI. Now, you might ask if TinyMC is still there, and yes, it is. You can, in fact, go in and change back to TinyMC if you want, or you can create a new data type to TinyMC. If you have existing data types lying around with TinyMC, we are not touching those, not in Umbraco 15. They are still running on TinyMC, so you can, in fact, run them side by side. You can change between them as you wish. The only thing you have to be aware of is if you do that, you need to set up the toolbar again and any other options that you have, because they are not compatible with each other. But without further ado, let's jump into some of the new things we can do with Tiptap. So one of the new areas we're introducing is a configuration called capabilities, or extensions, if you may. So all extensions are now showing up in here. That includes your own custom extensions if you have added any. Umbraco ships with these by default that you see here. There's a required extension called Rich Text Essentials, which has to be enabled for Tiptap, because Tiptap is also built with extensions. So if you don't enable any extensions, you can't actually do anything with Tiptap. So we want Tiptap to be able to handle HTML, and this is what it does in the default extension. So just to give you an idea of what that is, but it allows you to work with HTML, to support HTML structured content, and it also gives you the default buttons that you're used to in a rich text editor, such as bold, italic, underline, and alignment, lists, and so on. You get all of that from the core extension. And then there are some other extensions added, and they might look a little bit funny, like text align and underline, but they are in fact in Tiptap considered as extra extensions. So we have added them here to, but they to be default enabled. But what happens if I disable an extension, the corresponding button also becomes disabled. So extensions now has a concept of toolbar buttons as well. So if you add your own extension to Tiptap, you can define as many toolbar buttons as you want to go along with that extension. An extension doesn't have to have toolbar buttons, but before it was quite confusing how to add something to the toolbar versus how to add plugins to the rich text editor, and they have now been quite extensively worked through and documented, and to allow you to do that, and we can load them up as they are enabled, so we don't have to load all extensions for all rich text editor instances, for example. It's very much tied in with your configuration. Moving down a bit, there's the new toolbar designer. And this is, of course, a bit experimental, although it works, but it's we wanted to introduce something new as well with this editor now that we had the chance to sort of redo the configuration. The old rich text editor, the toolbar of that was sort of one layered list of toolbar buttons that you couldn't really rearrange or anything unless you did it through code. But now what we are able to do is have a multi-layered toolbar. So by default, it's in one row with a few groups. You can, in fact, add groups, and you can add rows with more groups to it, and you can drag buttons around as you see fit. So if I want some headlines, I can move them down here in the next row and save that, and they'll be there, and even delete them again. So we'd ideally like you to test this out as well and let us know what you think. We've been through quite a few iterations on how this looks and works and how much it needs to be tied together. There are maybe a few quirks to be aware of. One of them is blocks, because that's also tied to another configuration called available blocks. So if you don't immediately see blocks in RTE, it's because you need to add some blocks down here in the available blocks, and then the button becomes visible and you can put it in the toolbar. It might be a little confusing at first, but we hope it makes sense once you get to play with it. Let's just quickly see Tiptap in action. So I have a document type here with a few different properties, and Tiptap is here in the middle, called body text. And well, it's a rich text editor. There's actually not much to it. It has the buttons you're mostly used to. The icons are sort of new. We're now using the same icon set that the rest of the back office is using. So whereas TinyMCE has their own bundled icons, we can here, in fact, make it a bit more native to the back office experience. And that also means you can add your own icons through the icons extension and use them inside Tiptap for your own buttons. And just try and set something up. Let's try and set a block in. So this should be an inline block, and you can see it works. So if I wanted to put a number in there that's dynamic, I can do it like this. And let's go to the front end. Currently, there's nothing here. Reload, and we see the block is being rendered out. And so the output of Tiptap is HTML, and which is also the reason why you can interchange the UI from TinyMCE to Tiptap and even back. And so if there's anything that's not working, feel free to go back to TinyMCE. It's there for you to try out. And it is, in fact, a different experience. It might give some hiccups here and there, but it might also actually do things a bit better in certain areas. One being if you copy paste HTML from other sources into Umbraco, we have seen it being more clean than what TinyMCE was able to do. And this is because Tiptap is actually based on a schema that controls the output. So it's suitable to actually pull out a JSON object from Tiptap. We're using it with HTML, but it can be set up to put out JSON, and that follows a JSON schema. And so it tries to apply that to HTML as well, and to remove all sorts of attributes, such as styles and stuff that that other sources could potentially set in. It removes that and gives you a clean output. And we have seen some examples on that on the discussion as well. So if you want to see how it works, there are several comments about input and output of Tiptap available on GitHub. And please go in there and contribute if you experience any problems with it. Yeah, so that's Tiptap.
And I mean, it looks somewhat streamlined with the rest of the back office for a start, and I love how configurable it is. I think that's going to make a lot of people happy. There are, of course, a lot of devoted followers of fans of TinyMCE, and I believe the plan is that there will be a package that will add TinyMCE back, hopefully in time for version 16.
Yes,
yeah.
This is what we're hearing from TinyMCE themselves. They are going to release TinyMCE in a package from Umbraco. I believe they already have a premium plugin package for Umbraco 13 and below. And so this package would be updated with the actual editor itself. So yeah, moving on, once it leaves the core the alias becomes available for anyone to use. So TinyMC, when they release their package, you should be able to install it and keep using it as you see fit under the new license terms. So it will also be upgraded to TinyMC 7.
Yeah, but that's so when you're adding the package, you're then accepting their license terms, and that's up to your implementation. Cool, great.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jacob.
Welcome.
So that's content editors. Let's go back to the developers. Ken, I think you've got something developer-y to show us, haven't you? It's called Client Credentials for Headless Security. If that doesn't sound developer-focused, I don't know what would.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, Client Credentials. Well, it's actually two features in one. Because Client Credentials is not something new. It's new to Umbraco, but it's not new. It's been around for ages. It's an OpenID Connect standard, basically. So it's a standard mechanism of performing authorization. We're bringing it to Umbraco so you can authorize against our APIs from external sources. And it's a two-part feature. One is for API members, as they're called. That's used to authorize external sources against the delivery API to fetch protected content in a server-to-server fashion. And I won't be showcasing that today because we simply don't have time. But the other part is API users, and this is going to allow us to authorize against what is known as the management API, or what might eventually be known as the management API to everyone else than those of us who work with Umbraco. So when we built Umbraco 14 and the new Backoffice, we also built this brand new management API, which essentially powers the entire Backoffice. So anything we can do in the Backoffice can also be done by invoking endpoints in this API, and there are 300 and something endpoints to play with, so lots of stuff to have fun with. In 14, this API is strictly off limits for anyone else than the Backoffice client. I mean, theoretically, you could wrestle the APIs enough so you would be able to use the management API from the outside. I believe I read a blog post about someone having a very hard time getting all this to work because it was not intended. The intention has always been to make client credentials the official way of interacting with the management API from the outside. And that is what we're bringing to 15. So let's jump right back into it. An API user is pretty much just a regular user with a little twist. So in order to authenticate an external application against the management API, we need to create an API user, which will ultimately be used for impersonation by our external application. The fact that we're creating a user is actually really, really cool when we think about it, because users can be given or granted limited access to everything within the Umbraco database or Umbraco system. So API users are subject to the same permission sets as normal users are. So in effect, we can limit the impact that our external applications can have on our content, for example, or anything in Umbraco. That's really, really awesome, in my book at least. So of course I made my API user administrator because that's a thing, but that's just what I've done for this test. Now the twist with API users is they don't have a password. You're not allowed to log into the Backoffice as an API user. In fact, we're explicitly prohibiting you from doing so. Instead, you can tie sets of client credentials to an API user, and these client credentials, well, those are the ones the external application will use to obtain an access token, which lets the external application act on behalf of the API user, essentially as impersonation. Just to showcase this really quickly, here is a Node.js application, and there is a lot of boilerplate code here to set up OpenID Connect and to exchange client credentials for an access token. But ultimately, what happens here is we're getting an access token from our token issuing endpoint, and this access token can be used as a bearer token to perform operation against the management API. And in this case, I am fetching the current user data. And if a Zoom meeting here will let me load, here we go. So when I run this this fine little application, I'm getting a bunch of JSON back, which ultimately says I am getting the API user back here because I was querying the current user endpoint. So this sort of shows you that I am at this point impersonating the API user when querying the management API. And yes, this is a lot of code just to fetch the current user, but in reality, this is 30 lines of code. And now we are able to do anything against the management API that this particular API user would be able to do in the back office if they're able to log in, that is. So I'm super excited about this. I mean, this brings about a whole new way of building integrations against Umbraco in any language that supports OpenID Connect, which is basically any mature language. Using any language, using any hosting, using whatever you want, you can start building applications that integrate directly with Umbraco, and that's really powerful. So I'm very excited to see what this brings us.
Great, thank you, Ken. We're now going to move on to something that I'm quite excited about, and it's my turn to take over a demo. So with the release of .NET 15, we're also going to have a new quicker way for getting started with customizing the back office, and that's because we have released a new .NET New template to help with that. So with version 15, when you do your .NET New install Umbraco templates, version 15 will install, and this time you will have 3 templates available: the standard Umbraco project one to actually create your Umbraco project Docker file, I think that one is, and this new one here, the Umbraco extension.NET template. And this is the result of some hard work from the community package team and especially Warren Buckley. So big thanks to them. So to use it, you do .NET New Umbraco extension, you give it a name. I'm using the name demo.extensions, mainly to prove that dots work in the template. That's always a good test when you're working on .NET New templates. I'm giving it 2 parameters: the site domain, which is the URL of the website that this project is extending, and I'm also including this include example switch because I want some examples to be there, so that I can see things working in the back office. So when you press return and let that run, the .NET New template will run. It will then try and run some npm commands. And to do that, because .NET New templates, if you want to run a script, you have to say yes because it's security. So you say yes to saying, yes, we want to navigate to the client folder and run some npm commands. And then we get this when I can move my Visual Studio Code. So it has created this project for us here called demo.extensions. All I've done now is done a .NET add reference to my website. And again, hello, Sophie. Never going to get tired of saying hello to Sophie. When I log in, because I use that include examples switch, I now have an example dashboard. And what this dashboard gives us is 3 different buttons that talk to the server. So this one here, it's gone to the server, it says who's the logged in user, and it's passing back a object that gives us lots of the properties of the user, and it also demonstrates how you can use the notification service. This button here just gets the name, but it's forced a thread delay so that you can actually see the waiting state of a button, because otherwise everything happens too quickly now in the back office, so you never see the waiting state of a button. And then this one here just gets a date time back from the server. And then this bottom box here shows how you can do the same sort of thing, but this is actually going directly to the context API client side rather than hitting new endpoints in your C# controllers. It also will, let's just refresh that to prove that it is actually real, because I don't trust that. I can't type. Excellent. So in Swagger, it's added a new custom definition for your C# endpoints. And because I said yes to those examples, it's got these 3 methods that are behind those buttons. If you didn't include example switch, you'd just have this ping method. So we did want to have one method in there so that you have a C# controller, so that you have stuff that appears in the Swagger definition, so that all the wiring is basically done, but you don't have these 3 methods that you're then going to have to delete yourself. And hopefully, if you've been using V14, you will be used to going to look in extension insights. And just to prove, we've got 3 in here, which this package has have been added by this project, a entry point, a bundle, and a dashboard. So that's what you get when you run the template, and you can just see it working in the browser, which is very reassuring that things are working and wired up properly. If I go back to VS Code, I'm just going to do a very quick sort of highlight of a few key things that you should start looking at, because really we've done this so you can go and play around yourself without having to go through all the boilerplate setup that you would have to up until now. So I think that the key files that you need to be thinking are in the client folder. We have the Vite config TypeScript file, and this is telling us to start with our bundle. We've done a bundle for the manifests, and to put the output of that into www-root, it's going to Vite as a build server that will compile the TypeScript files, and it will compile it into this file called demo extensions. And when you do npm run build, it will put things in the wroot folder. And then, because this is a Razor class library, when you add the dependency to this project, the Razor class library will basically give you everything that's in that wroot folder in the app plugins in the right place in your website. The files won't be there, because that's not how Razor class libraries work, but that is where they will be mounted, for want of a better phrase. So that's your Vite configuration file. Then another one, the package.json file. So that just defines the dependencies that the front end needs, much like the NuGet restore dependencies that we're used to seeing in C#. And we have 3 scripts that have been defined already. We have a build. So when you do npm run build, it will do the TypeScript compilation and the Vite build tools. Vite build scripts. If you do it with watch, then that's what you want to do. npm run watch when you're working in the back office, then it will do hot reloads for you, so you don't have to keep stopping and starting. And then this is my absolute favorite, npm run generate client. And what that will do, and this is why you needed to pass in your site domain, is it will go, as long as your website's running, it will go and get the Swagger documentation, the Swagger document that we were looking at via the browser, and it will then generate in source API the TypeScript version of all your C# endpoints, so that when you are working in the back office, when you're working in your front end scripts, TypeScript will give you IntelliSense, it will give you compilation, and it will just make your life so much better than when you were just hopefully remembering the right names of properties for AngularJS things. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot in here. As I say, it starts with bundle manifests, which then tells it to go and look at the entry point. The entry point is all about, it looks a bit familiar to what Ken was just showing us. It's all the boilerplate that you need for the authentication for the request to the Swagger URL to work. I don't care about that, so I'm never going to look at that again. It works. Brilliant. Thank you very much, template. Dashboard is where you really want to spend your time. This is a web component that's got enough in here. It's got a decent amount of dependencies at the top. It shows how to use the notification service. It shows how to get the current user context and how you consume those. and then you've got some methods that have been defined, and then you've got this lit way of allowing us to specify the HTML, and then it's a web component, so of course we should have our styles in here. So this is the lit way of allowing us to define our styles, and that is what a web component is: all encapsulated, reusable, completely safe from everything else. I mean, Jacob, I feel like I've not done a good enough job of explaining how clever all these things are, but is there anything desperate you'd like to add in 2 minutes?
No, I'm actually really impressed to see how far you've got with this whole thing, and thanks to everyone in the community involved in this as well. It'll really elevate Umbraco extensions and how to work with them. I guess it's about time. So it's good to set some nice defaults and give people an idea of how to get started.
I think we've always been a little bit scared. It's quite opinionated. Obviously, it's using Vite and Lit and TypeScript because that's how we've built our extensions. But I think it's time for opinions. If you don't like what we've done here, then you go and do it your own way, whether that's how you set up your front-end projects, whether that's using a completely different framework, you can do that as well. And there's still a lot to learn, but this will allow people to see something working and just start playing around. And for all the people like me who learned how to do stuff in AngularJS, which was by looking at how Kevin Jump did it in Usync, this is kind of a good starting point. The one thing I didn't point out actually was, I think, Umbraco package.json, which lives in the public folder. And that's where you are actually defining the extension. And if I've got this right, Jacob, by saying that this is what gets loaded at startup, this file here. If we then
that's static file, yes.
But then the nice way of using a bundle here, rather than listing out all our separate extensions, is when you go and change the bundle, it should just work in a browser refresh. You don't have to restart the application. Is that right?
Yes. Well, it used to be like that in Umbraco 14, but since then we have actually managed to make Umbraco package files be dynamically loaded. They are cached like 5 seconds now in development mode. So you could actually define them here, and you wouldn't require a restart of the server. That being said, you will end up with potentially 40, 50 extensions, and it's just nice to have them aligned in a TypeScript file, which also allows you to use types safety interfaces around the extensions.
Cool. Well, we look forward to hearing how people get on with this, and I'm sure some more opinions will be shared. But I think in terms of demos, that's all that we have. So upgrade considerations for people. The classic, we're changing the .NET 9 version. So what I always forget to do is first of all upgrade your project to .NET 9, and then you upgrade your Umbraco references. Other than that, we do have some notable breaking changes, and
if you just open the accordion,
yep, let's scroll down to there.
Part of the new cache is that snapshots are no more. So every time you use the snapshot, iPublish snapshot, you will need to update it to the iPublish content cache or iPublish media cache. And a side effect of this is models builder models actually used the snapshot before. So if you can't just get rid of them and rebuild them automatically, you will need to update your models builder models to use the new iPublish content cache.
Okay.
But it's all mentioned there.
Yeah. Is that it? I sound disappointed, sorry. Cool, thank you very much. So it's really over to you to now go and have a go. It will be available on NuGet on Thursday. Secret, we're recording this a couple of days before, so I have actually used a little bit of magic to say that Umbraco 15 is available on Hour already, but it will be on Thursday, and it hopefully will be on cloud as well. We're so close to the wire with the Microsoft release of .NET 9 that it's not entirely sure when it will be rolled out to various regions, but hopefully it'll be on Umbraco Cloud at the same time.
Exactly. We will ensure it's available on the regions we use as soon as it's available on the underlying Azure infrastructure.
So yes, please go and try it. And if you want some more information, there will be a full blog post on umbraco.com on the day of release and full release notes as usual. So now it just leaves me to say thank you very much to you three for joining me and taking me on the journey of this excellent new release that I'm looking forward to a lot more people giving it a go than perhaps they may have changed version, may have tried 14. So we're looking forward to getting lots of feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.